Josh, thanks so much for having me. Always a pleasure to be on.
First off, just kind of break down for me the arguments here and what we can expect to happen inside that courtroom.
Well, there's a presumption that trials in this country are public. So, especially in state court, usually we'll see cameras in the courtroom, and I do a lot of trial commentary. Now, in federal court, it's a little bit different because there's that federal rule of criminal procedure 53 that bans any type of cameras, either video or still, in the courtroom. That's why you see those sketch artists. Well, the Koberger case, of course, is a state case in Idaho State Court. So normally you would expect cameras to be allowed, but the defense is trying to keep them out, and I actually think they have a chance of being successful in that motion, Josh.
And break down some of the arguments for me here that we've heard, because a lot of these are making the rounds on social media, including one that includes the fly of Brian Koberger and the fact that, you know, his defense is arguing that the cameras are focusing too much on that. So what are the arguments kind of on both sides?
Well, the argument is that it prejudices the defendant or it may taint the jury pool. And in this particular case, because it's a death penalty case, the defense is filing any and all motions they can, not because they necessarily expect them to win, but in these types of death penalty cases, Josh, you're actually more likely to get a death sentence reversed on appeal than you actually have of convincing a death penalty qualified jury not to return a guilty verdict. So that's why you see these motions to dismiss the indictment, challenging the evidence, suppression motions. And this is one that they're going to file because I think they do want to keep cameras out, but they also want to create a potential appellate issue down the road if Koberger is actually convicted.
And the reason I mentioned social media is that one of the arguments that was mentioned in a motion is that the defense is saying that some of the cameras there are too focused on the fly of Brian Koberger's pants. That's one that a lot of people have been talking about. What do you think about that argument? Because I can tell you, we've seen a lot of that video here. We had some of it playing a short time ago, and there's not one shot that I have seen showing the fly of his pants.
I've never seen that either. And, you know, when there are cameras in the courtroom, there's very specific restrictions on it. So, for instance, the jurors, they can't be shown. You're never going to see a juror on any of these TV stations that regularly broadcast trials. There'll be a camera on the judge. There'll be a camera at defense counsel table, which will include the defendant, Brian Koberger. There'll be a camera at the prosecution table as well, and a camera on the witness, as well as a camera in the gallery. So there's no camera that's zoomed in on a defendant, much less the defendant's pants. So, you know, don't necessarily believe everything you see on social media, folks that are watching, because that would be inappropriate, and no judge would allow that in any case, civil or criminal.
That's good advice. Definitely don't pay attention to everything that you see on social media. So when you have the victims' families arguing that there should be cameras allowed in the court, does that have sort of any impact here on the judge's decision?
It has less of an impact. And the reason why I think this motion may be granted is the judge is taking a very cautious approach in this case. So, for instance, the defense asked for this very broad gag order covering not only the parties, the lawyers, but even the victims and their families in this case. That's not typical. Now, of course, the victims' family members, they may have to testify at the penalty phase of the case if a jury is going to decide whether to put Koberger to death. So, you know, you have this very broad gag order, which really favors the defense. So what I've seen in this case is whenever there is a close call, something that might be a ball or strike, the judge has taken the defense's position, because again, that avoids any issue on appeal. So I wouldn't be surprised if the judge denies cameras in the courtroom or has some sort of delayed feed or audio only. That's what we saw in a very recent high-profile case out of Idaho, which was doomsday couple Lori Vallow, who was convicted of murdering her 2 kids.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Are there any other cases beside that one that come to mind when you think about the debate over whether cameras should be allowed inside the courtroom?
That's a recent case where I was surprised. Again, the judge did side with the defense, kept cameras out. But, I mean, as you see in state court proceedings throughout the country, I mean, obviously we all saw Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Donald Trump's Fulton County state case is being televised. Now, of course, he wants cameras in the courtroom. But typically, cameras are allowed because there's a presumption of public access. The public has a right to be there. Reporters have a right to be there. And when you don't have cameras, it becomes a logistical nightmare because you have a pool of reporters or folks that want to participate, members of the public. You have these overflow rooms. Logistically, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The best result usually is to have cameras, keep the jurors safe, but the rest of the proceedings really should be televised.
And at this point, we're awaiting a decision because that hearing is going to be later on today. But in your perspective here, it is possible that we could actually see cameras banned from that courtroom and from future hearings.
It's possible. Just again, reading the tea leaves here, a little bit of just trying to predict what this judge is going to do. Judge has been very conservative when it comes to his defense motions, has sided with the defense, as well as the previous we're talking about two of the biggest cases in Idaho state history, two of the most gruesome murders in Idaho state history. Given how the judge ruled in the Lori Vallow case, and now we're seeing another defense motion in the Kohberger case, I wouldn't be surprised to see if cameras are either banned or restricted.
All right, Nima Rahmani, former federal prosecutor, a friend of the show. Anything else you want to add about all this before I let you go?
No, I think this is sort of par for the course. When we saw Kohberger's lawyers waive their right to a speedy trial and file motion after motion, their strategy is to delay and then potentially look for those appellate issues, not necessarily trying to win at trial.
All right, Nima, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, I do want to take you out to a live